Elia Vasquez was 8 years old, and she had crayon dust on her fingers. She walked through the lower corridors of Orion Crossroads Station with her school bag bouncing against her back, and a rolled-up drawing clutched in her small hand. The drawing showed 5 figures standing in a row. Herself, her best friend Tomas, a Relathi girl named Pule, who had 6 arms and always shared her lunch, a tall Gorthak boy who was shy but kind, and a Valeran classmate who never talked much, but once gave Elia a piece of strange purple candy. She had drawn them all holding hands. Some of the hands were tentacles, some were claws. She did not care. They were her friends. The human enclave sat on the lower decks of the station, where the ceilings were low and the lights buzzed with a faint yellow hum. It was not the worst place to live, but it was far from the best. The walls were metal. The air always smelled a little like engine grease. But the people who lived there had done what humans always do. They had made it home. There were small gardens growing under UV lamps. Someone had painted a mural of Earth's ocean on the wall near the water station. Children ran through the corridors after school, laughing and shouting in 3 different languages. Elia turned a corner and almost bumped into a wall of black armor. A patrol of Velaran security officers stood in a line across the corridor. There were 6 of them, tall and sharp, their insectoid bodies wrapped in dark plating that clicked when they moved. Their eyes were like black glass. They carried shock staves at their sides, long weapons that hummed with a low electric sound. At the front of the patrol stood Prefect Thyra Velshan. Thyra was tall even for a Velaran. Her exoskeleton was dark green, almost black, and her rank markings glowed in sharp orange lines across her chest plate. She had served as the senior law enforcement prefect on the station for 9 years. In that time, she had run more than 40 contraband inspections in the human enclave. She had never once found actual contraband. That was not the point. The point was to remind the humans where they stood. She looked down at the group of children and clicked her mandibles in a sharp command. The words were in High Velaran, a language that most adult humans on the station barely understood, let alone an 8-year-old girl. Elia stopped walking. She looked up at the tall officer with wide brown eyes. She did not understand what the officer had said. She looked to her left and right, hoping one of the other children knew what to do. 2 of them had already pressed themselves against the wall. One was crying quietly. Thyra spoke again, louder, sharper. Her forelimb pointed at the ground, a Velaran gesture that meant kneel. Elia did not know this. She just stood there, frozen, holding her drawing against her chest. Thyra Velshan hit her. It was not a push. It was not a shove. It was a full backhand strike from an armored forelimb that weighed more than the child it hit. Elia's small body flew sideways and struck the corridor wall. She crumpled to the floor like a paper doll. The drawing fell from her hand and landed in a spreading pool of red. Her cheekbone was broken. One of her baby teeth lay on the metal floor, 3 feet from her body. For a moment, the corridor was completely silent. Then, Elia screamed. It was the sound that every human parent knows in their bones, the high, broken wail of a child in real pain. It echoed off the metal walls and carried down the corridor and into the open doors of a dozen homes. People came running. Humans dropped what they were holding and moved toward the sound like iron pulled to a magnet. A Relathi merchant named Duvan was standing at a nearby shop stall. He had seen the whole thing. His 6 arms were shaking. With one of them, he quietly raised his datapad and pressed record. Thyra looked down at the bleeding child on the floor. She did not kneel. She did not call for medical help. She turned to one of her officers and said in Velaran, "Log it. The Deathworlder child charged at me. Standard use of force." The officer nodded and made the entry. Marco Vasquez arrived 4 minutes later. He was a station engineer, a big man with thick hands and tired eyes, who spent his days fixing the same systems that powered the Valeran officers' quarters 3 decks above. He pushed through the crowd and saw his daughter on the ground, with blood on her face and a medic pressing a cloth to her broken cheek. He dropped to his knees beside her. He did not shout. He did not scream. He just put his hand on her hair and said, "I'm here, baby. Papa's here." His voice broke on the second word. Elia looked up at him. Her left eye was swelling shut. Through the other eye, through tears, she whispered, "I didn't do anything, Papa. I didn't do anything wrong." That night, the station magistrate, a Valeran appointee named Counselor Dreth, reviewed the incident report. He watched the official security footage, which had been carefully edited to remove the initial strike. He read Thyra's statement. He ruled that the use of force was within standard protocol for non-compliant subjects in a restricted inspection zone. Case closed. No charges, no apology, no justice. But Duvan the Relathi merchant had already uploaded his recording to the Galactic net. Within 6 hours, it had been viewed 400 million times. The galaxy watched an armored Valeran officer strike a small human girl hard enough to break her face. They watched the child fly into a wall. They watched her bleed on a crayon drawing. They watched the officer walk away without looking back. The alien networks filled with debate, opinion, and argument. Some said the humans were overreacting. Some said the child should have obeyed. Some said nothing at all, because they had seen this before in their own enclaves and knew that speaking up changed nothing. The human networks were different. They went quiet. Across dozens of stations and colonies and ships, humans watched the video and said very little. Families watched it at dinner tables and then sat in silence. Soldiers watched it in barracks and then cleaned their weapons without a word. Captains watched it in their quarters and then made calls on encrypted channels. The galaxy had not yet learned what human silence meant. They would. 3 systems away, aboard the heavy frigate UHS Revenant, Captain Jonah Mercer sat alone in his quarters. He was 42 years old. He had gray at his temples, and a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, a gift from a Xenopirate's blade 6 years ago. He had buried his wife the same year. He was not a man who broke easily. He watched the video once. He watched a little girl who reminded him of a daughter he never had get struck by someone who was supposed to protect her. He watched her bleed. He watched her drawing land in her own blood. He set down his coffee. He sat still for 10 seconds. Then he opened a secure comm channel to Fleet Command and said 5 words. "I need authorization. It's time." The line was silent for 3 seconds. Then a voice replied, "Granted. Bring her home." Mercer closed the channel. He stood up. He looked out the viewport at the stars, cold, distant, and completely indifferent to what was about to happen. Ambassador Idris Achebe had spent 30 years in diplomacy. He had negotiated trade deals with species who breathed methane. He had brokered peace between civilizations that had been at war for longer than humans had been using fire. He was 61 years old, calm by nature and patient by training. He did not raise his voice. He did not lose his temper. He played the long game, always. But when he watched the video of Elia Vasquez being struck, his hands shook. He watched it once in his office on Thesara Prime, the political capital of the Galactic Federated Council. Then he closed the screen, pressed his fingers to his eyes, and allowed himself 10 seconds of rage. Just 10. Then he straightened his tie, picked up his datapad, and began drafting a formal protest. The document was sharp and clean. It demanded 4 things: the immediate arrest of Prefect Thyra Velshon, a public apology from the station authority, an independent investigation by the council, and full medical compensation for the child. It was submitted through proper channels within 3 hours of the incident. It followed every rule. It used every correct form. It was, in every legal sense, perfect. The Velarin Dominion responded in 12 hours. Director Kale Suroth, High Director of the Velarin political bloc and one of the most powerful figures in the galaxy, held a press address from his chambers. He was old, even for a Velarin. His exoskeleton had faded to a dull bronze. His eyes were sharp and cruel. He stood behind a podium carved from the bones of a conquered world, and spoke with complete calm. "The incident on Orion Crossroads Station is an internal security matter," he said. "The Velarin Dominion does not answer to the emotional outbursts of Deathworld species. Our officer acted within protocol. The child was non-compliant. Deathworlder offspring must learn compliance, like any other fauna on our stations. This matter is closed." The words spread across the galactic net within minutes. It burned through every human network like acid. Achebe read it in his office and closed his eyes. He had expected resistance. He had expected dismissal. He had not expected them to say the quiet part out loud. He took the protest to the council floor the next day. He stood in the great circular chamber where 4,000 species were represented and made his case. He was calm. He was precise. He showed the unedited video. He read the magistrate's ruling. He read Suroth's statement. He asked the council to act. The chamber was uncomfortable. Delegates shifted in their seats. Many of them had seen the video. But the Velarin Dominion held 3 permanent seats on the council, controlled vast trade routes, and funded the defense fleets that protected half the galaxy's shipping lanes. Standing against them cost something. Standing with a Deathworlder species cost even more. The vote for a formal investigation failed. 37 species voted in favor. 62 voted against. The rest abstained. Councillor Jet Morvain, a Relathi diplomat whose people had a long and quiet friendship with humanity, met Achebe privately after the vote. Morvain floated in a portable water tank, her translucent body pulsing with soft blue light. She was genuinely sorry. "The votes are not there, Ambassador," she said. "Not yet. Perhaps in time." "In time," Achebe repeated. He looked at her with eyes that held something very old and very tired. "Counselor, an 8-year-old girl had her face broken by an officer of the law, and the system you and I serve has just told her it doesn't matter. How much time would you suggest I give it?" Morvain had no answer. That night, Achebe returned to his office and composed a message on the most secure channel the United Human Authority possessed. It was short. It said, "Law has failed. The child has no justice. Advise." The response came from Earth in under an hour. It was one line. Noted. Mercer is authorized. Achebe read it, deleted it, and poured himself a drink. He stood at his window and looked out at the lights of Thesara Prime, a beautiful city built by species who had been crossing the stars when humans were still learning to farm. He respected them. He admired their achievements. And he understood, with a clarity that hurt, that none of it mattered if a child could be broken and no one would answer for it. He finished his drink and began preparing for what came next. 3 systems away, Captain Jonah Mercer received his orders aboard the UHS Revenant. He read them once, then called Lieutenant Raya Okafor to his quarters. Okafor was 29, built like a fighter, and had eyes that never stopped scanning for threats. She had grown up on a colony world that was raided when she was 11. She remembered hiding in a grain cellar while alien pirates burned her village. She remembered the smell. She never talked about it, but it lived behind her eyes like a fire that never quite went out. Mercer showed her the orders. She read them without expression. Then she looked up. "When do we move?" she asked. 48 hours. I need the team briefed and the insertion plan finalized by tomorrow." "We go in quiet. And if quiet stops working?" Mercer met her gaze. "Then we go loud. But either way, We bring the girl home and we deliver the message. Okafor nodded. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply said, "I'll have the team ready in 12 hours," and left. Mercer spent the next 2 days in contact with human intelligence assets on Orion Crossroads Station. There were humans everywhere on that station. Engineers, cleaners, dock workers, cooks. The kind of people that powerful species never really looked at. The kind of people who saw everything. They gave him patrol schedules. They gave him security camera blind spots. They gave him access codes for maintenance tunnels. They gave him Thyra Velshan's daily routine, her quarters location, the number of guards outside her door, and the brand of stimulant she drank every morning. Meanwhile, on the station, things were getting worse. Valeran security had increased their patrols in the human enclave. They called it peacekeeping. Everyone knew what it really was. Marco Vasquez, Elia's father, was arrested on charges of inciting unrest after he gave an interview to an independent journalist. The charges were invented. The evidence was nothing. He was taken to a holding cell on the upper decks, and his daughter was placed in a temporary foster facility run by Valeran Social Services. Elia sat in a small white room with bandages on her face and asked when her papa was coming back. No one answered her. The humans on the station watched all of this. They said nothing. They went to work. They fixed the pipes. They cooked the food. They cleaned the floors. And they waited. Other Deathworlder species began to take notice. The Gorthak, massive stone-skinned people from a heavy-gravity world, sent a private message to the human ambassador. "We stand with you. Tell us what you need." The Drenari, a reptilian species from a volcanic planet, made a similar offer. The Makal, quiet, patient people who looked like walking trees, simply said, "It is past time." For centuries, Deathworlder species had been treated as second-class members of the galactic community. Useful for war, useful for hard labor, useful for colonizing planets that no one else could survive, but never equal, never respected, never protected by the same laws that shielded the comfortable species who lived on gentle worlds with mild weather and soft gravity. They had all been struck in one way or another. None of them had ever seen anyone answer for it, until now. On the bridge of the UHS Revenant, the final jump coordinates were locked in. The ship was running dark. No transponder, no identification signal, no communication with any traffic control. To anyone watching, it was a ghost. Mercer stood on the bridge and watched the countdown timer tick towards 0. Around him, his crew moved with quiet purpose. No one spoke louder than necessary. No one made jokes. There was a feeling on the ship that was hard to name. Not anger exactly, not excitement, but something deeper, something old. The feeling a wolf pack gets when it finds the trail. The timer hit 0. The stars stretched and bent. The Revenant punched through the fabric of space and disappeared. It reappeared at the edge of the Orion system 11 minutes later. The station hung in the distance, a massive wheel of light and metal, spinning slowly against the black. The Revenant did not hail the station. It did not request docking clearance. It did not announce itself in any way. It simply sat there in the dark, engines cooling, weapons cold, and waited. On the station, in her quarters, Prefect Thyra Velshan poured herself a drink and reviewed the day's patrol reports. She had heard the rumors that the humans were planning something, that a ship had been spotted in the outer system. She dismissed them. Humans were animals, loud, emotional, and easily frightened. They would protest, they would shout, and eventually they would accept their place. She finished her drink and went to sleep. The station's night cycle began at 2200 hours. The lights in the main corridors dimmed to a soft blue. Most shops closed. Most residents slept. The Valaran patrols continued, but with fewer officers and longer gaps between rounds. Night was safe. Night was predictable. Nothing ever happened during the night cycle. At 22:17 hours, a maintenance hatch on the station's lower cargo deck opened from the outside. No alarm sounded. The hatch had been unlocked 3 hours earlier by a human dockworker named Gabriel, who had worked on the station for 6 years and had never once been noticed by anyone important. He left the hatch unlocked, went home, kissed his wife, and went to bed. He did not know the details of what would happen. He did not need to. 12 figures came through the hatch in single file. They wore no uniforms. Their armor was matte black, designed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They carried no flags, no insignia, no identification of any kind. Each of them moved with a silence that should not have been possible for beings their size. Humans are not small creatures. They are heavy, dense, and built from muscle and bone, forged on a world that tried to kill them every day. But these 12 moved like smoke. Captain Jonah Mercer was the third one through the hatch. He carried a short rifle and a sidearm. He wore no helmet. He never did on operations like this. He wanted to see clearly. He wanted the people he met to see his face. There was a reason for that, and it was not kindness. Lieutenant Raya Okafor was right behind him. She carried a blade in addition to her firearms. She had learned knife work in a refugee camp when she was 12 years old, taught by a woman who had survived 3 colony raids. Okafor hoped she would not need it tonight. But she was glad it was there. The team split into 2 groups. The first group, 6 operators under Sergeant Dow, moved toward the Valaran foster facility where Aaliyah Vasquez was being held. Their orders were simple. Get the girl, get her father from his holding cell 2 levels up, and bring them both to the human docking bay on Deck 9. Do it quietly. Do not harm the child. Do not harm any civilian. But if anyone with a weapon stands between you and that little girl, put them on the floor. The second group, Mercer, Okafor, and 4 others, moved upward through the station's guts. They climbed through maintenance shafts and ventilation tunnels that had been mapped in perfect detail by human workers who had been crawling through them for years. Every turn was planned. Human technicians on the station had introduced a small software error into the security system 3 days ago. Nothing dramatic, just a 2-second loop in the camera feeds along specific corridors at specific times. 2 seconds was enough. They reached the officers' ring at 22:44 hours. This was where the senior Valaran staff lived. Wide corridors with clean white walls, soft lighting, and the faint smell of the chemical perfume that Valaran officers use. It was a different world from the human enclave. It was comfortable. It was protected. It was supposed to be untouchable. 2 Valaran guards stood outside Prefect Thyra Velshan's quarters. They were armed with shock staves and sidearms. They were well-trained and alert. They had been stationed there as a precaution after the threats began circulating on the human networks. They never saw Mercer's team coming. The first guard was pulled into the shadows and put into a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in 4 seconds. The second turned at the sound and got 2 steps before Okafor hit him at the base of his neck with a precise strike that dropped him like a puppet with cut strings. Both guards were bound and gagged in under 30 seconds. One of them would later tell investigators that the humans had appeared out of nowhere, like they grew out of the walls. Mercer placed a small device against the door lock. It clicked once, and the door slid open. The quarters inside were large by station standards. There was a desk, a sleeping alcove, a small personal shrine that held Valaran religious icons, and a window that looked out at the stars. The room smelled like chemicals and old authority. Thyra Velshan was awake. She was sitting at her desk in her underarmor, a light exoskeletal frame that Valaran wore beneath their full plating. A glass of stimulant sat half-finished beside her. She had been reading reports. She looked up when the door opened and saw 6 humans standing in her room, armed and silent. And for the first time in her long career, she understood what fear tasted like. She reached for the alarm panel on her desk. Okafor shot it with a suppressed round before her claw touched the surface. The panel sparked and died. Thyra stood. She was tall, a full head taller than Mercer. Her mandibles spread in a threat display, and her voice came out hard and sharp. "You are dead," she said, in accented but clear galactic common. "All of you. The Dominion will burn your worlds for this. You are animals. You are nothing." Mercer stepped forward. He did not raise his weapon. He reached into a pouch on his vest and pulled out a piece of paper. Crumpled, stained, torn at one corner. He unfolded it and held it up so she could see it. It was Elia's drawing, the one with 5 children holding hands, the one that had landed in a pool of the girl's own blood on a corridor floor, while Thyra walked away without looking back. The crayon colors were still bright, green, purple, yellow, blue, but the bottom corner was dark red and stiff, where the blood had dried. "Do you know what this is?" Mercer asked. His voice was quiet. Not calm, quiet. There is a difference. Calm is the absence of emotion. Quiet is emotion held so tightly that it becomes something else entirely. Thyra looked at the drawing. She said nothing. "This is what she was holding," Mercer said. "She was 8 years old. She was walking home from school. She drew a picture of her friends, and you broke her face because she didn't kneel fast enough in a language she doesn't speak." "She was non-compliant," Thyra said. "The law." "We tried your law," Mercer said. "We filed a complaint. Your magistrate dismissed it. We went to the council. They voted it down. Your director called our children fauna on galactic broadcast. Every door we knocked on was shut in our face." He took one step closer. "So we stopped knocking." Thyra's eyes moved to the door behind him, calculating, measuring. Mercer saw it. "Your guards are alive," he said. "The humans on this station are safe. The girl is being moved to our ship as we speak. This is between you and me." "You cannot do this," Thyra said, and for the first time, her voice was not angry, it was afraid. "I am a prefect of the Valeran Dominion. I am protected by the Accords. You will start a war, but wars have been started for worse reasons than a child." He asked her if she had anything to say, anything at all, any word of regret, any acknowledgement that what she did was wrong. Thyra straightened to her full height. Her mandibles clicked. She looked at him with those black glass eyes and said, "I would do it again. She is vermin. You are all vermin." Mercer nodded slowly. He folded the drawing carefully and put it back in his vest. He looked at Okafor. She looked back. Something passed between them. Not a word, not a signal, just a shared understanding built on years of trust and loss. What happened next was quick. It was not cruel. It was not slow. It was a single clean act, carried out with the precision of people who understood exactly what they were doing and why. When it was done, Mercer's team wrapped the result in a stasis field and placed it in a sealed case. In Valeran culture, what they had done carried a very specific meaning. It was the ultimate denial of honor, of legacy, of the spiritual passage that every Valeran believed awaited them after death. It was not random. It was not thoughtless. It was a message written in the only language that power had ever understood. The team moved back through the station the same way they came, silent, fast, and invisible. They reached the docking bay at 23:31 hours. Sergeant Dow's team was already there. Elia Vasquez sat on a cargo crate, wrapped in a thermal blanket, holding her father's hand. Her face was still bandaged. She was not crying. She looked up at Mercer with one good eye as he passed, and he paused just long enough to put his hand gently on the top of her head. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would fix what had been done to her. But she leaned into his hand for just a moment, the way children do when they feel safe, and that was enough. The team boarded the Revenant. The docking clamps released. The ship pulled away from the station in silence. At 23:48 hours, the Revenant's communications officer sent a single data packet on the Galactic Council's emergency frequency. It contained one line of text. Justice has been collected. Receipt attached. Then the engines flared white, the stars bent, and the ship vanished into the dark between worlds. By the time the station's security teams found the unconscious guards outside an empty room, the Revenant was already 3 systems away, and the galaxy was about to learn what happens when you hurt a human child and expect the universe to look the other way. The Grand Council Chamber on Thessera Prime was the largest enclosed space in the known galaxy. It was a perfect circle, half a kilometer across, with seats rising in tiers like the inside of a bowl. 4,000 delegations had seats there. The ceiling was a dome of living crystal that shifted color with the mood of the debates below. Blue for calm, gold for celebration, red for crisis. Today it was red. The emergency session had been called 6 hours after the Revenant's data packet was received. Every delegate who could reach Thessera Prime was there. Those who could not attended through holographic projection, their ghostly forms flickering in their assigned seats. The chamber was full, fuller than it had been in decades. The air buzzed with the sound of 4,000 species whispering, clicking, humming, and hissing in their native tongues. Director Kale Suroth of the Valeran Dominion had demanded this session. He stood at the central podium, a raised platform in the exact middle of the chamber, and his rage filled the room like heat from a furnace. His bronze exoskeleton was fully armored. His attendants flanked him in ceremonial formation. He had brought guards, he had brought lawyers, he had brought the full political weight of the most powerful species bloc in the galaxy. "This is an act of war," he said, and his voice echoed through the translation systems in every language the galaxy spoke. "A Valeran officer, a prefect of the Dominion, has been murdered by Deathworlders savages. Her body has been desecrated in violation of every sacred law of our people. We demand the immediate surrender of Captain Jonah Mercer. We demand the full disarmament of the United Human Authority. And we demand that this council authorize military action against every human world, station, and colony until these animals are brought to heel." The chamber murmured. Many shifted uncomfortably. A few, in the upper tiers where the smaller and weaker species sat, were very still. Suroth continued for 20 minutes. He spoke of law and order. He spoke of galactic stability. He spoke of the danger of allowing primitive species to act without consequence. He did not once mention an 8-year-old girl with a broken face. He did not once say the name Elia Vasquez. When he finished, the Speaker of the Council, a neutral Pelathi who served as moderator, turned to the human delegation. "The representative of the United Human Authority may respond." Ambassador Idris Achebi rose from his seat in the lower tier. He was dressed simply, a dark suit, a white shirt, no medals or decorations. He was 61 years old, slim, and walked with the careful grace of a man who had spent his life choosing his steps. He carried a sealed metal case in one hand. The chamber quieted as he walked to the podium. 4,000 species watched him. He could feel their eyes, optical, thermal, magnetic, compound, all fixed on the only human in the room. He set the metal case on the podium. "Before I begin," he said, "I want to show the council something." He opened the case. Inside, preserved in a blue stasis field, was the severed head of Prefect Thyra Velshon. Her black glass eyes were open. Her mandibles were frozen mid-snarl. The stasis field hummed softly in the silence. The chamber erupted. Delegates screamed. Several species fled their seats. The Valeran delegation surged forward, their guards drawing weapons, before council security blocked them. Director Suroth's face, if an insectoid face could show expression, twisted into something beyond fury. The crystal dome above flashed between red and a deep, furious purple that the chamber had never displayed before. He stood beside the open case, with his hands clasped behind his back, and waited. It took 4 full minutes for the speaker to restore order. When the chamber was finally quiet, not calm, but quiet, Achebe began to speak. 12 days ago, he said, a Valeran officer named Thyra Velshan struck an 8-year-old human girl named Elia Vasquez with enough force to break her cheekbone and knock a tooth from her mouth. The child was walking home from school. She was holding a drawing she had made of her friends. He touched a control on the podium, and the unedited video played on every screen in the chamber. 4,000 delegations watched an armored officer backhand a small girl into a wall. They watched the child fall. They watched the blood. They watched the officer walk away. We filed a formal protest within 3 hours, Achebe continued. We demanded an arrest, an investigation, and an apology. We respected every rule. He touched the control again. The station magistrate's ruling appeared on screen. The magistrate dismissed our complaint. He ruled the use of force was within protocol. Another touch. Suroth's press statement appeared, with one phrase highlighted. Deathworlder offspring must learn compliance like any other fauna. The director of the Valeran Dominion called our children animals on Galactic broadcast, Achebe said. His voice was steady. It had not risen once. We brought our case to this council. We asked you to act. You voted it down. 62 species chose political comfort over the broken face of a child. He paused and looked around the chamber, slowly, making eye contact with as many delegates as he could. You built a system, he said, in which the powerful cannot be held accountable. A system where a child can be beaten on camera and the law says it is fine. Where the species that did it can call the child an animal and face no consequence. Where every legal path to justice leads to a closed door. He placed his hand on the edge of the stasis case. You left us no lawful path, so we walked an unlawful one. The chamber was absolutely silent. And we will walk it again, he said. Every single time. Whenever a human child, or any child, is harmed, and the law refuses to answer, we will answer. This is not a threat. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of what we are. We are Deathworlders. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day of our existence. We survived, not because we are strong. There are stronger species in this room. Not because we are smart. There are smarter species in this room. We survived because when something threatens our children, we do not stop. We do not negotiate. We do not accept. And the galaxy can either build a system that makes that unnecessary, or it can learn to live with the consequences. He let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Then he laid out his demands. Full civil rights for all Deathworlder species. An independent judiciary, free from Dominion control. Legal protections for children of all species on multi-species stations. A formal public admission from the Valeran Dominion that the assault on Elia Vasquez was unlawful. And a warning, if these demands were not met, humanity would withdraw all military, labor, and frontier support from the galactic community and form a defensive alliance with every Deathworlder species willing to join. Director Suroth rose before Achebe had finished. You dare to make demands? You murder our people, and then stand here and make demands? The Dominion will crush you. We will glass your worlds. We will. You are welcome to try, Achebe said quietly. He did not need to. But before you do, Director, I suggest you watch that video one more time. And remember, that is what we did for one child. Imagine what we would do for all of them. Suroth opened his mouth to speak, but another voice cut through the chamber first. Counselor Jet Morvain, the Relathi diplomat, rose from her water tank. Her translucent body pulsed with light, and her voice carried clearly through the translation system. I have been silent too long, she said. My people have traded with the Valeran for 800 years. We have benefited from that relationship. But I watched that video, and I saw what many of you saw, a child being beaten by someone who was supposed to protect her. And I watched this council do nothing. She paused. The humans did something terrible, but they did it because we failed first. I support the ambassador's demands, all of them. The Gorthak delegate stood next. He was enormous. 8 feet of gray stone-like skin and deep-set eyes. He said only 4 words. We stand with humanity. Then the Drenari delegate. Then the Makal. Then a dozen smaller species. Then 24 more. Species who had been pushed to the margins for centuries. Species who had been struck and ignored. Species who had watched the video and seen their own children in Elia's face. One by one they stood, and one by one the Valaran Dominion found itself alone. The vote was called at the end of the session. It was not close. The measures passed by a margin that stunned even Achebe. Full civil rights, independent judiciary, child protection laws, a formal censure of the Valaran Dominion, the first in the Council's history. Suroth left the chamber without speaking. His guards followed. The Valaran seats emptied. The crystal dome above shifted slowly from red to something it had never shown before. A deep, steady gold that spread from edge to edge like a sunrise. The session was over. In his quarters on the Revenant, 3 systems away, Captain Jonah Mercer watched the vote tally come in on a small screen mounted to his wall. He sat in the same chair where he had first watched the video of Elia being struck. He read the numbers. He read the results. He read the words, motion carried, in plain text at the bottom of the screen. He leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in 12 days, the ship around him felt quiet in a way that meant something different than before. Not the quiet before the storm. 6 months passed, and the galaxy was different. Not completely different. The stars were the same. The trade routes still hummed with cargo ships. The stations still spun in their orbits. But something had shifted beneath the surface of things. A crack in the old order that could not be sealed. A new understanding that changed the way species looked at each other in corridors and across negotiating tables. Elia Vasquez was 9 years old now. Her cheekbone had been reconstructed by a human surgeon who had traveled 4 systems to do the operation for free. The scar was small, a thin white line under her left eye that she would carry for the rest of her life. The doctor said it would fade with time. Her father said it was a mark of strength. Elia said it made her look like a pirate, and she was not unhappy about that. She went back to school, the same school on the same station, in the same corridor where she had been struck. Her father had been offered transfers to a dozen different stations, safer ones, quieter ones, places where no one would know their name. He turned them all down. Marco Vasquez was a stubborn man. He fixed pipes, and he raised his daughter, and he refused to let anyone drive him from his home. The school was different now. Not in its walls or its classrooms, but in the small things. There were new rules. Every announcement had to be made in Galactic Common, never in a single species language. Security officers on the station were required to wear body cameras that fed to an independent monitoring system, not one controlled by the station authority. And in the main hallway, someone had put up a small glass case with a drawing inside it. 5 stick figures of different species, holding hands, colored in crayon. The original was gone, stained and preserved as evidence. This was a copy that Elia had made from memory. It was not exactly the same. The figures were a little taller, but it meant the same thing. Ambassador Idris Achebe kept the original in his office on Thessera Prime. It hung on the wall behind his desk, next to a framed photograph of his grandchildren and a small wooden carving of a baobab tree that his mother had given him 40 years ago. Visitors sometimes asked about the drawing. Achebe would tell them the story. He never shortened it. He never softened it. He believed that the full truth was a form of respect to Elia, to the people who acted, and to the galaxy that was forced to watch. The Galactic Independent Judiciary began operations 3 months after the council vote. It was housed in a new building on Thessera Prime, neutral ground, funded by contributions from over 200 species. 3 Deathworlder species held permanent seats on its panel, and its first Chief Justice was a Rilathi named Councillor Jet Morvain, who had left politics to serve the law she believed in. The first cases it prosecuted were not new ones. They were old ones, decades old, some of them. Assaults on Deathworlder civilians that had been dismissed by local magistrates. Disappearances that had been ruled voluntary migration. Children taken from families under laws that classified Deathworlder parents as unfit by biology. Case by case, the new court opened the old wounds and cleaned them properly for the first time. It was not fast work. Justice never is. But it was real, and it was happening. And for species who had spent centuries being told their pain did not matter, that was everything. The Valeran Dominion did not collapse. Empires built over thousands of years do not fall because of a single vote. But they changed. Director Kale Suroth retired from public life 2 months after the council session. Officially, it was for health reasons. Unofficially, his own people had decided he was a problem. The Valeran were many things, proud, rigid, hierarchical, but they were not stupid. They could read the political map. They understood that the galaxy had shifted, and that clinging to the old ways would cost them more than adapting. A new generation of Valeran diplomats began to appear in the council chambers. They were younger, less armored, and they spoke Galactic Common without the accent of contempt that had marked their elders. One of them, a junior attaché named Selah Venthal, was seen in the Thessera Prime library one evening, reading a human history text. She had stopped on a chapter about something called the Nuremberg Trials, a moment in human history when a species had looked at its own capacity for cruelty and decided to build laws against it. She was quiet for a long time afterward. The next week, she submitted a proposal to the Valeran Foreign Ministry for expanded interspecies rights statutes. It was rejected. She submitted it again, and again. Eventually, someone listened. Captain Jonah Mercer was officially listed as wanted by what remained of the old Valeran political bloc. A bounty was posted. It was large. No one tried to collect it. Unofficially, Mercer was the most recognized human in the galaxy. Not celebrated exactly, because what he had done was not the kind of thing you celebrate. Respected, feared, understood. People knew his name the way they knew the name of a storm. He did not give interviews. He did not write a memoir. He continued to command the Revenant, taking assignments along the frontier where the galaxy's edges were rough and dangerous. He ran his ship well. He took care of his crew. And sometimes, late at night, when the ship was quiet, he would stand in front of a small memorial wall in the Revenant's lower corridor. It was not an official memorial. It was a piece of bare metal wall where someone had begun scratching names. Names of Deathworlders who had been hurt or killed in incidents like Elia's, on stations and colonies across the galaxy, in cases that never made the news and were never investigated. There were a lot of names, more than most people would be comfortable knowing about. Mercer would stand there and read them and say nothing. He did not add names, he did not remove them. He just stood there, bearing witness, because he believed that someone should. Lieutenant Raya Okafor took leave for the first time in 3 years. She traveled to Orion Crossroads Station alone, in civilian clothes, carrying a bag from a shop in the station's commercial district. She found Aliyah in the schoolyard during lunch, sitting with Pule, the Relathi girl, and drawing in a new sketchbook. Okafor sat down on a bench nearby. Aliyah looked up at her with curious eyes. She did not recognize Okafor. She had never seen her face. She only knew that on the worst night of her life, people had come and taken her somewhere safe, and she had fallen asleep in her father's arms, on a ship that hummed like a lullaby. "Hi," Aliyah said. "Are you someone's mom?" Okafor almost smiled. "No, I'm just visiting. I brought you something." She held out the bag. Inside was a new set of drawing supplies: pencils, crayons, markers, a thick pad of real paper, and a set of colored pens in 12 colors that did not exist on Earth. Aliyah's eyes went wide. "For me? Why?" "Because I heard you like to draw," Okafor said. Aliyah took the bag and opened the pen set with the careful excitement of a child who has just been given treasure. She pulled out a pen that was a color somewhere between gold and orange, a color that only Relathi eyes could fully see, and held it up to the light. "Are you a soldier?" she asked, still looking at the pen. Okafor watched her. She thought about the night cycle on the station. She thought about the maintenance tunnels and the dark corridors, and the weight of the stasis case in her hands. She thought about what it cost to do what they did, and what it would have cost not to. "Sometimes," she said, "but mostly, I just make sure kids like you get to keep drawing." Aliyah nodded, as if this made perfect sense. She uncapped the gold-orange pen and began to draw. The galaxy moved on, the way galaxies do. New crises arose. New debates filled the council chamber. The crystal dome turned blue and gold and red and blue again with the endless rhythm of politics and power. But something remained. Not in the laws, though the laws were real. And not in the institutions, though the institutions were new and strong. Something remained in the way people told the story. On 100 worlds, in 100 languages, parents told their children about the human girl with the drawing and the people who came for her. The details changed in the telling, as they always do. In some versions, Mercer was a giant. In some, Achebe made the entire council weep. In some, the Revenant was as large as a moon. But the core of the story never changed. A child was hurt, the law did nothing, and the Deathworlders came. It was not a story about violence. Not really. It was a story about what happens when love is strong enough to become something the universe cannot ignore. On Orion Crossroads Station, 6 months and 3 days after the night that changed everything, a small boy, a Gorthak child, no more than 5 years old, was running through a corridor and tripped over his own feet. He skidded across the floor and crashed into the legs of a Valeran security officer. The officer was new, young, part of the rotation that had replaced the old guard. She looked down at the child sprawled at her feet, a small gray creature with wide, frightened eyes and a scraped knee. She knelt down. She helped him pick up the toys he had dropped, and she said, in accented but careful Galactic common, "Are you all right, little one?" The boy nodded and ran off, already laughing again. The officer watched him go. She straightened her uniform and continued her patrol. She did not think of it as the galaxy changing. She thought of it as the obvious thing to do, the only thing to do, when a child falls down in front of you. And perhaps that was the point. The galaxy had always known what Deathworlders could destroy. It took one little girl with a box of crayons and a bruised face to teach them what Deathworlders would die for and kill for to protect. Not territory, not power, not pride. Just the right of a child to walk home from school, holding a drawing of her friends, and arrive safely. Just that, nothing more.